We are being forced into ignominious retreat from the region to the number two objective after survival, which was and still is the expulsion of hostile American forces from the region. Either throw the Americans out or we'll finish the job and there won't be much of you left. Now, he understands that, but he started the war anyway. Well, I think he's already jumped off the cliff. And he's probably looking for a parachute in the hope of a soft landing. But I said every B 52, every B 1, every B 2. And I think he'll concentrate as many fighter aircraft as he possibly can. And every submarine that he can lay his hands on that has missiles that can be fired, non nuclear. And he'll give it one more shot because I don't think he can do the other thing, which is what we discussed, which is simply be rational.
There's a kick out of it. How are you?
All right, Mario, pretty good. What's up with you?
Well, I was very optimistic yesterday, and then I've been optimistic for a while, as you know. But there's a report that came out today, or news that came out today. I'll share it with you, and I'll get your thoughts. So the first one is according to Reuters, and I think one more source. The Iranians are seeking a fee equivalent to 5 to 7% of the value of cargoes transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is trying to bring it down to 3%. And I did a quick search to see, I did it during an interview, to see what the Turks, and maybe you have the information, but what the Turks and others would be charging. It's 0.1 to 0.5%. It's incomparable. So Suez is 0.1 to 0.5. Same for Panama. The Bosphorus and Dardanelles, 0.01 to 0.1. So incomparable fees to what the Iranians are seeking based on these reports. So that's the first one. And then I saw another one, came in from Iranian news, just came in not long ago, that they're also separate to this deal with Oman. They're also passing an act, a Strategic Control of Hormuz Act. They're preparing it to try to get it passed through Parliament. And that law is on top of the Iran-Oman deal. And they want to control all ships that go through. They want to make sure any countries that were part of the war pay reparations before using the Strait of Hormuz. The Americans and Israel and any other hostile countries are not allowed to use the Strait of Hormuz. And not only if they're hostile towards Iran, if they're hostile towards Iran and their allies, the axis of resistance, they called it the resistance front. So any country that attacks the Houthis, that attacks I don't know if Gaza, Hamas will be included, Hezbollah will not be able to go through the Strait of Hormuz. And any country that caused damage to Iran, obviously mainly the US and Israel in this case, will have to pay compensation fees before they use the Strait of Hormuz. So all this they want to pass on top of the 5 to 7% fee. Like that's pretty wild. I don't know if they're negotiating here, but that's pretty crazy.
Are you surprised?
I'd be honest, yes. Like that's a lot. That is a lot.
Well, let me talk about something else, but it's nevertheless related. I was involved in 1995 for a few months in the run-up to the Dayton Accords that was supposed to end the Bosnian Civil War. This was a civil war between Croats, who were Roman Catholics, Serbs, who were Orthodox Christians, and Bosniaks, who were Muslims. Now, at the time, there was a lot of enthusiasm for forcing the repatriation of people back into areas where they used to live that were now occupied entirely by the people that drove them out. In other words, push Muslims back into areas where they used to live after they had been driven out by the Serbs or the Croats. Push Croats back into areas where they used to live when they have been driven out by Serbs and Muslims, and put Serbs back into areas where they used to live, where the Croats and the Muslims lived. Now, this went on and on. This was all in the name of, everything from equality to diversity to God knows what else. This had to happen. Wouldn't work. Too much blood has been spilled. That was the answer that I gave, and that was the answer that ultimately was accepted. Ambassador Holbrooke understood that and literally had to tell the Europeans, who were the advocates for this sort of thing, that's unrealistic. It can't be achieved. We came up with a settlement that wasn't perfect, but it has worked to some extent, and it ended the bloodshed at the time and has suppressed most of the violence since then. What you're dealing with in Iran right now, and you've got to understand this, are a lot of people who are victims of this war, people who have lost family members in this war. A lot of blood has been spilled, a lot of infrastructure has been destroyed. It will take a long time for this country to recover from what it has just been through. In other words, the population, the nation, is traumatized. You had similar conditions that existed in the aftermath of the Second World War, expecting everything to sort of be set aside in favor of goodness, understanding, and fair treatment to everyone is not realistic. Iran is not going to open its doors and welcome anybody that has worked tirelessly to destroy Iran with open arms. Now, I think that some of these things, as you point out, are probably excessive, not by Iranian standards, but by your standards, my standards. But nevertheless, we're going to end up in a situation that is very close to what exists today in the Dardanelles. I think that's where we're headed. The difference is that one side of the strait will be controlled by Iran, the other side will be controlled by Oman. Not surprising. That makes sense. Let's say that Bulgaria had controlled the European side of the Bosporus, then control would have been shared between the Turks and Bulgaria. But that wasn't the case. The Turks control the entire stretch. And they signed the convention in 1926, I think, the Montreux Convention, and they've controlled it and managed it very effectively ever since. I think we will see something similar with Iran. And I think whatever the initial fees are, they will be adjusted over time. But right now, you have people in the government who are angry, who are striking back in their minds in defense of their country. And they're saying, damn it, these people that have done so much damage to us, not just in this war, but in the years leading up to it. You got to go back to the Iran-Iraq war and remember that, because all of the Sunni Arab states were pouring money into Saddam Hussein, as we were, by the way, and equipping Saddam Hussein in the hope that he would march into Iran and destroy the Khomeiniist revolution, which at the time we were comparing, believe it or not, to the Bolshevik revolution. Now, you've got to go back and understand the past if you're going to appreciate the present. So this is not a new phenomenon for them. They look across the Gulf and they see all of these enemies from the border of Iraq all the way down to the border with Oman. And they're not terribly inclined to compromise and be friends with these people. These people are going to have to pay for what they've done. That's the mentality. We, of course, forget it. We're not even in the picture. We're not part of the negotiation. And unless we're willing to go back to the MOU, and I don't see any evidence at this point that we are, we will have no say whatsoever of any kind in anything. Everything will be decided by Iran in the Gulf, and probably with the urging support, whatever the word is, that encourages some degree of moderation from Moscow and Beijing, and to some extent also from New Delhi. These are great powers, and they will urge, and have urged from the very beginning, restraint, and they'll urge the Iranians to be more moderate in their demands. There's no question about that. Very few other people are going to have a voice whatsoever in what happens in the Persian Gulf. So I think we'll just have to be patient. We'll have to watch carefully how this develops. I think over time it will develop more positively. But the world is not going to return to normalcy. There's no chance for the Middle East to look the way it did, a year ago in another 5 or 10 years. That's not going to happen. The world has changed, period. And we, most of all, are out.
My worry is that, I've always thought the war is over because it just failed. It doesn't work. And, there's a lot of reasons to walk away. And there's not many reasons to continue the war. And I also thought the Iranians would demand a lot because they won the war, but within reason. If these reports are true, where they charge if my math is correct, 0.01 all the way to 7% is like 700 times more than what is charged in the Dardanelles, assuming my math is correct, so people can fact check me on this. But it's definitely more than any other straits by far. And they're putting rules and restrictions on who can pass and when. That is essentially first charging an exorbitant fee. And number two is weaponizing the straits, because what I was expecting is Iran will charge a fee, a relatively reasonable one, maybe above reason, to make up for the reparations. And then there'll be freedom of navigation, and that will be the end of it. Maybe there'll be restrictions on the US military. But I did it for them to pass a law saying we will control who goes in and out, and no country will be able to use it unless they pay reparations and promise not to attack us or these other groups in these different countries. That just flips the entire freedom of navigation world, the new world order after World War II, upside down. And I worry that now they're essentially intentionally or unintentionally forcing Trump back into the war, assuming these reports are true.
Well, two things to consider. The first part is that World War II did not result in the sort of paradise like environment that you're suggesting. The Soviet Union and China were very much on the outside. They did not participate in any of the arrangements or agreements that were reached at Bretton Woods, the IMF, the World Bank, and so forth. So they stood aside. This was not a global solution by any means. And the situation around the world remained very, very tense for a long time, particularly in Central Europe, where you had the largest buildup of military power in the history of mankind. We all sat there with our guns fully loaded, pointed at each other. And we did that for almost 50 years. So I don't think you can go back to World War II and say that once it ended, we all sort of slapped each other on the back and said, well, that's okay. Now we'll get on with things. Also remember that we're primarily a maritime and aerospace power. When we expressed an interest in freedom of navigation, even though we've never signed the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea, we've never signed it. You ought to keep that in mind. So we talk about freedom of navigation. Well, we haven't signed it, so do we really believe in it? We believe in it for us.
Why didn't we sign it?
Well, because
Why didn't the US sign it? Sorry.
Yeah, we saw ourselves emerging from the war ultimately as not completely global, but certainly close to being a global hegemon. In other words, no ship could move, no aircraft could move without us ultimately having an influence over it. What did we want to sign a convention in the UN for that would restrict us in any way? So we run these so-called freedom of navigation cruises up and down the South China Sea, which for the most part are provocations against China. All right? They're not freedom of navigation operations as popularly noted. So I guess this to set aside this notion that everything was better afterwards and things should be good now. It's not true. Again, you got a lot of blood that's being spilled, a lot of territories exchanged hands in the Bosnian War and also at the end of World War II, and we're still dealing with that in Ukraine. Now, if you look at the Middle East today and you understand that, 500 to 750,000 casualties in the war that Iran fought against Iraq after Iraq invaded Iran with our encouragement and at the urgent plea of the Europeans, and we tried to snuff out this Khomeiniist revolution, which we equated with Bolshevism in 1918. You take that into consideration, the people that are going to sail through without probably any cost or at all for some period of time will be Russia, China, India, Japan, and I expect ultimately Korea. All of those countries have no hostile intent towards Iran, never did. In fact, they've offered their aid and assistance. They've sent in aid wherever they could beyond just military assistance. So I don't think that's surprising. Now, what about the rest of the world? Well, they're going to watch very carefully what happens on the west side of the Gulf right now. And remember, as far as they're concerned, the UAE in particular and Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, these places have been nothing but launch pads for U.S. military power to either contain or attack Iran. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're not treated very equitably for some period of time. Now, how long will that last? An awful lot depends on what sort of arrangements are made. My point, and this is an important one, is I don't see where we play a role anymore. See, the truth is, right now, we are staring strategic defeat in the eye in the Persian Gulf. Let there be no mistake about it. We have been militarily defeated. We are being forced into ignominious retreat from the region. Once it became clear to the Iranians that Iran would survive, they turned their attention to the number two objective after survival, which was and still is the expulsion of hostile American forces from the region. Now, that doesn't sit terribly well with some of our friends in the statelets of the Persian Gulf, but we've demonstrated we can't protect them, and they've reminded us of that. And they're going to face a situation very shortly where there's one of two things has to happen. Either throw the Americans out, or we'll finish the job, and there won't be much of you left. And I think that's where the Iranians are at this point. We have to also heed the wishes of the people that live in the region. And I think ultimately people in the region are going to say, we've had a good relationship, but it's no good anymore. You really can't protect us, and you're going to have to leave. And I think those are the preconditions for some sort of peace in the region. Now, there's a problem here, and that problem is Israel.
Israel. All right. Talking about the Gulf, CNN put out an article as we went live. According to a regional official, Gulf state leaders are concerned about shortages of air defense munitions and have acknowledged these shortages could hinder their ability to intercept Iranian missiles and UAVs, drones. Iran also reportedly told Gulf states that energy infrastructure or water desalination sites across the region would be struck if America conducts new strikes against Iran. That report was from yesterday, the second one. So two pieces of information here. Number one is, unsurprisingly, the Gulf are warning that they don't have enough interceptors. They're not ready for a new barrage by Iran. And number two, the Iranians I've talked a lot about this in the last few days. Their rules of engagement has changed drastically to put Trump in a very difficult position. One, I think they struck the ship in Egypt. Some people say it was either a false flag or another country or unknown. But I think they struck the ship in Egypt as a warning to the Americans. They preemptively struck Jordan and Kuwait to change, as I said, the rules of engagement. The Iranians are like, hey, if you start attacking us or if you do anything, we're going to decide when it stops. So you can't start and stop whenever you want. And we have a bigger target base now. And now with this new threat that was reported yesterday, but that came in a few days ago, the Iranians are like, any strike on our territory, will result in strikes on the energy infrastructure and civilian infrastructure like desalination plants, as well as US bases in the Gulf. So this is Iran making it clear for Trump that either you go all in, as in gloves off, full-blown war, or you don't strike us ever again, number one. And then with the earlier report about their demands on the negotiations, they're asking for crazy fees, and they're passing a pretty crazy law. So I don't know whether the Iranians are putting Trump in a position where he literally has no choice but to do what we've discussed for months now, and just walk away, say, look, I messed up. He'll obviously say something different, but I messed up. I'm going to let the rest of the world clear it. The consequences of my fuck up will be felt for many, many years to come, if not decades, but I can't do anything about it. And I don't know whether this is what the Iranians are forcing Trump into. Maybe that leads to my next question is, with all these updates that happen and all the other news in the last few days, what's more likely now, in your opinion? Trump, a deal, Trump walking away, or back to war?
Well, I think you're asking a question that everybody wants an answer to.
Yeah,
Some,
exactly.
some people are saying, well, he's not going to go back in and
Let me
bounce.
open Polymarket, Colonel. Let me open Polymarket before you answer. All right, go ahead.
Some people are saying, no, he's not going to attack. I heard that the last time. I've heard that so many times. Oh, no, he won't attack. He understands the ramifications. He does understand the ramifications. And he made that very clear when he was in Paris and he signed the MOU. He said, I don't want to be Herbert Hoover. And I'm not going to be responsible for the world global depression that will result if I don't open the strait. So he does understand that. But having said that, Tucker Carlson also has related that before the war started some time ago, and you've got to go back to 2023. Tucker brought me on his program. I think it was in August of 2023, up in his studio in New England, and he asked me point blank, opening question: Are we on the path to war with Iran? And I unhesitatingly said yes. Okay. Now, some people thought I was a lunatic, and he was a little surprised that I answered so straightforwardly, but I said we were. He then subsequently reported years later, just before all of this business began in February, that he had actually gone to the Oval Office and talked to President Trump. And that in this discussion, he was very straightforward about the Iranian war probability. And he said that President Trump understood all the pitfalls, all the dangers, all the problems, everything, clearly. And he walked out of the Oval Office with a feeling, well, the president does understand the dangers, the difficulties. This is not an easy operation. This is not going to be over in a few days. And it may not work out. He understands that. But he started the war anyway. Now, I think it's important to hear. He started it anyway. Now, I got a lot of people that say, well, this General Kane and others have said, Mr. President, this isn't it. It's all crap. Why? Kane was brought out of retirement as a 3-star, promoted to 4 stars for one reason: to go to war with Iran. He wanted a chairman of the Joint Chiefs who understood that's where we're headed. He may never admit that publicly, but that's the case. So everybody in the administration that signed on early as an Israel firster knew we were going to go to war with Iran. It was a question of when and how and under what circumstances. And we started all these visits from Mr. Netanyahu over and over and over and over again until finally the war broke. This is America's war on behalf of Israel for Jewish hegemony in the Middle East. And it ties back to New York City. It also is connected to Zelensky and his regime in Kiev, because many of the same billionaires that we call Zionists in the United States, who are agents for Israel, who put Trump into the White House, are also interested in the destruction of Russia. And they have been pushing war with Russia in Ukraine, using Ukrainians as cannon fodder to achieve their goals. Now, that's failed, and that's not going to change. They're now pressing for the same thing in the Persian Gulf. It is not about regime change, inspiring an open popular revolt, saving the Iranian people from this oppressive Islamic regime. That's all nonsense. This is about the destruction of Iran. That's what they want. That's why they put Trump into the White House. That's why they have gained control of the Congress. And that's what they're going to get, come hell or high water. So there are 3 doors, okay? You described 3 doors, 3 options. There's 3 doors. Door number 1 is go back. Go back and bounce rubble. Go back and attack again. Now, this time it'll be different. And you see, this is the gambler's fallacy. I've lost and lost, but I'm a winner. I can do this and I will win. I'm going to throw the dice and I'm going to risk everything and I'm going to win. That doesn't work very well. That's door number 1. That's where Trump is to some extent. He's got a foot there already in the door. Door number 2 is, I need to get out. This is a failure. It's been a big mistake. I need to cut my losses and get out. That's tough because of this group over here from Israel. And Israel's agents are saying, you can't just leave. If you leave, the world will end. The world will end. Israel will be destroyed. Will be destroyed. ICBMs with nuclear warheads will rain down on all of us all over the world. Okay. I had a similar discussion with General Dave Petraeus. He and I taught the Department of Social Sciences together. I went out to Leavenworth to give a speech in 2005, and so I met with him briefly before I went and gave my presentation. And I said, Dave, why? Well, he said, what do you think about Iraq? I said, Dave, we ought to get out. We need to get out. Oh, no, we can't just leave. If we leave, Anbar province will become a platform for the projection of Islamist terrorism all over the world. No. I said, Dave, I think we should leave. And you know what, Dave? That's what we did when we left Vietnam. We just left. Now, my point is, that's not doable for Donald Trump because of the Israel lobby and the connections that he has there, the obligations he owes. And he may be under some form of duress. I don't know.
Yeah.
Then there's a third door that you kind of mentioned. That's where you may say, well, we'll strike a few targets and then we'll talk, and then we'll talk and we'll strike a few targets, but we'll hammer out some sort of arrangement that we can all live with. I don't see that happening because it hasn't worked in the past in Trump's mind. And Trump has to be able to declare victory in some fashion, or he can't walk away. That's part of his problem, his Roy Cohn rules and so forth. So there are your three doors. And it's a question of, is it really door number one or door number two? Now, the good news about door number two, where you said, the hell with this, I'm out of here, is it in the United States, Mario? Nobody cares. No one's interested in the Persian Gulf. No one wants to kill anybody over there. I'm serious. So all you have to do is look at the polling data. It would help him. If you're worried about the midterm elections, and I don't see any evidence that he is, but if you were worried about them, that'd be a great way to set yourself up for some degree of damage limitation. You had the wisdom to say, forget it and get out. And the American people are remarkably forgiving. If he stood up and he said, I'm here to tell you, this was a mistake. It's been an enormous failure. There's no point in reinforcing failure. I'm a businessman. I know when to cut my losses. I'm getting out. If he did that, he would do very well, but that would not go down with the Israel lobby.
What about the Gulf lobby or the Gulf influence over Trump? Iran, according to reports yesterday, Iraqi, I think, or Iran, was threatening the Gulf, telling them we'll strike your energy infrastructure, but also urging the Gulf to keep pressuring Trump not to strike them. And there's a report that just came out now that Trump is about to have another call with MBS from Saudi. How much influence do you think MBS has over Trump, if any? Because he did have a call with him, according to reports, just before Trump tacoed again.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he talked to MBS or not. It makes sense that he would have. It also makes sense to me that MBS is saying, look, we can't withstand a major attack by Iran. They can destroy every refinery. They can destroy the pipelines. They can destroy Yanbu. I mean, they can reduce us to poverty from which we will not recover for decades. The problem is, can MBS help Donald Trump survive an impeachment attempt? No.
Yeah.
But the billionaires, the Zionists, the Jewish lobby, they can stand by him and they can prevent the Congress from removing him from office. And if the Democrats, for whatever it's worth, they call themselves Democrats, I don't know what they are, but they hate Trump. And if they win the majority in the House and the Senate, there's a very high probability that he will be subject to impeachment. Now, who's going to help you resist that? Who's going to come up with the money and the attorneys and the lawyers? Who's going to pull all the strings in the network and keep you alive? MBS? I don't think so. I think Israel can do it. Israeli influence and power, the power structures here, it's enormous. It reaches into everything, most particularly finance and the media. And if you're interested in politics and you can control that, you're in a very strong position. So I don't know what MBS can offer him. I think that MBS will be very honest with him. And I think he will also be honest about the plight that confronts his peers in the rest of the region. There's no question about that.
Galibaf just posted now. He's making fun of Trump. He's like, quote, massive attack coming. Wait, never mind. They want to negotiate. And then he says, that's theater diplomacy on loop. Using bullying plus broken promises plus fake news as leverage is a failed strategy. Acknowledge the facts and fulfill your commitments. We don't need more theater. They're really going after him. They're really trying hard to embarrass him.
Well, I'm not sure that's going to be very helpful to their cause, but
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
the bottom line is accurate. There's not much question about that.
Yeah.
We've got many more important things to think about in the United States. And that's really what he was elected to deal with. He's betrayed that trust. He's in a lot of trouble.
You haven't mentioned much the munitions issue. Does that worry you? Is it as significant as the press is making it out to be? The interceptors, 50 to 80%, depending on which. Long-range missiles, same, 60 to 80% or 60 to 75%. How concerning is this? I understand there's shorter range missiles and dumb bombs to replace long-range precision missiles, but on the interceptors, there is no alternative, is there?
No. Well, I've written a lot of those about that for weeks. So it's true. Now, I can't tell you with precision because I don't have access to that classified information. And if I did, I wouldn't share it with you. But I think we can safely say that we are at a very low level. Now, I spoke recently to someone who worked for years inside the defense industrial complex. And he said, look, Doug, I'm tired of all of these people complaining that we are not producing missiles fast enough. He said, let's look at the true situation. He said, number one, this is not a declared war. We haven't declared war. When we declared war in December 1941, what did we do? We mobilized industry immediately. We moved enormous resources into the public sector from the private sector. We brought in people to manage and run the massive factory effort that was built and undertaken at the time. He said, we have had none of that. And he said, there's a big difference between an assembly line that turns out B 17s or Sherman tanks and Jeeps and an assembly line that builds precision guided missiles designed to fly hundreds or thousands of miles. He said, you've got a lot of people on that line who are technicians, who are experts. They can only move as quickly as they, as individuals, can in order to ensure that the quality of the product will perform to expectation. And he's right. Most of our strike missiles have performed to expectation. There's no question about it. Now, as far as the interceptors are concerned, that's less the case. But the interceptor technology is actually pretty old. It goes back to the 90s. But nevertheless, if you don't have them to fire, you are naked. Right now, Zelensky has nothing. 28 Russian missiles, ballistic missiles, some hypersonic, some not, all penetrated and struck targets in and around Kiev within the last 24 to 36 hours. There was nothing he could do about it. Well, that's the situation that MBS faces. And that's a situation that we face because you now have Grinkiewicz, this general, I don't know if he's Army or Air Force or whatever he is in the European Command, who spoke publicly and talked about, I need another destroyer. You know, I've got to make a decision here whom I'm going to protect. Am I going to protect the United States or am I going to protect Israel? Now, I think he made that statement with a dual motive. On the one hand, I think he's concerned about the interceptors. I also think he's speaking for a lot of people in the U.S. Armed Forces who, frankly, are not terribly excited about going to war for Israel. Now, the point, though, is the same. Yes, we don't have what we need. We have some of what we need. We don't have all of what we need. And now I heard someone mention earlier today, I don't know if it's true or not, that it will be 2032 or 2033 before we reach the stockage levels that we had before this war began.
Jesus.
Well, I'm sure that's probably accurate. I wouldn't be surprised. It takes time to build these complex
That's
weapons.
crazy.
Well, the whole war is crazy. This
It
war
is.
should never have happened. We should never have initiated this. This makes no sense. And I lost a lot of friends in Israel because I took that position. I said, this is nuts. And when this is over, Israel may not survive it.